Hey students, Mrs. Dukoski here. Welcome for your Chapter 5 Catcher in the Rye lesson. Before we get started, just want to say hello. I really hope and wish that we can also be together in the classroom for some of this lesson and reading Catcher in the Rye. But again, these videos are for you if you're at home and you're working remotely, and I hope that you do find them helpful. So this will be our Chapter 5 Catcher in the Rye lesson. We're going to first start off with just looking at a screen share. We'll talk about what I like to call a be now instead of a do now, where we just kind of find ourselves in our present moment, preparing ourselves to be focused for the lesson. So important to notice how you're feeling, to be prepared to focus and to sit and learn and be available to, really take in what it is that we're doing together, which is reading this great book, this great work of fiction by J.D. Salinger. That's a total American classic. And so here I am, I've got my mug again. We heard about Jane Gallagher, right? And how she keeps her checkers in the back row. It's a defensive move. And we left Holden off at the end of chapter 4, worried about what's going to happen with Jane on her date with Stradlater. So he said goodbye to Stradlater. Stradlater's got Holden's jacket on. He borrowed Holden's houndstooth jacket. If you don't know what houndstooth is, it's a pattern. You can look it up, or maybe I'll post one in the video description. A houndstooth is this pattern that is pretty detectable once you see it. So he's got Holden's houndstooth jacket on, and Stradlater's out on a date with Jane Gallagher, and that worries Holden because, as we mentioned in the last video, Stradlater is described through characterization, both direct and indirect, and he is someone that you would maybe worry about having a girl that you like, that you think highly of, out with. So Holden doesn't trust him. He is entitled, Stradlater. He's used to getting what he wants. He takes what he wants, and we'll hear a little bit more about that, but not until chapter 6. So chapter 5 leaves Holden at Pensy. We know his central conflict is he is getting kicked out, so he's not going to be at Pensy much longer. He's just kind of like waiting to leave, and it's the evening, and he's kind of left there after Stradlater goes out with Jane Saturday night. And Allie has come back to kind of see what's up with Holden after Stradlater left, because we know that, Allie's not so fond of Stradlater. So Stradlater left, Allie has come back, and we pick up there. So there's not that much time has passed, and we're going to see what goes on after, Stradlater's left and Allie and Holden are back together again, just wondering what it is they should do to pass the time by, knowing Stradlater's out on this date with Jane. All right, so with that said, I'm going to start my screen share, and I do hope everyone is doing well. So here's my screen. I'm going to go into our Schoology class and find those chapter 5 notes. So chapter 5, really get used to looking for the notes. Gives you just a quick rundown of what we're going to do in our lesson, the main part of the lesson being that we're going to read together. But there are a couple of other things that we should take a look at. So the first one I'm going to do with you myself this time. It's the get focus. This is just a 1-minute get focus. And I love these. This one is, again, just another quick exercise. This by a source called Headspace. They also have an app, not to be a total ad for them. There's lots of apps, though, that you can find to really give yourself the opportunity to get focused, find some breathing exercises or some quick meditations, just some, ability for you to tap into here and now, noticing how you're feeling so that you can approach whatever it is that you're setting out to do with some greater clarity. So that's really the attempt of the Be Now before we start our assignments together, our lessons together. So I'm going to open this one, and we're going to enjoy it together for 1 minute, 1 whole minute. I love it. All right. I'm such a fan of taking time to take these brain breaks, I'll call them. I hope that we can hear this. So I hope that you were able to hear that. It was coming through my headset, and if not, you can just kind of click in and open it in your own window. Take that minute. I love more than a minute, but even if you can just afford yourself 1 minute and just take a few breaths, allow your thoughts to just kind of settle and notice, it just puts me in such a better space to then move forward with whatever it is that I'm trying to do. So I encourage that, and I'm going to do some sort of what I call Be Now before every one of our lessons. And, if you have any ideas for our Be Nows, please reach out to me. I'd love to, share what works best for you. And please, keeping in mind that I'd like them to be under 5 minutes. So some kind of less than 5 minute, get focused first before we start our lesson. Right. With that said, just quickly noting, and we're not going to watch these together, but there are the quick review videos for chapters 3 and 4. If you need to go and do a quick review before we get into chapter 5, the first chapter, chapter 3, was that Allie chapter, and the last chapter was more focused on Stradlater. And now we're going to get into chapter 5. So we had these characters that we were introduced to, and we explored characterization, both direct and indirect. Now we get chapter 5. We have Holden, and we're going to focus on the literary technique. This is a technique. This is not an element of symbolism. So we've started paying attention to some of the symbols that are going to come up in Salinger's classic, and he uses symbols really specifically, and I think I appreciate his use of symbols. Holden's hat is one of the symbols that we've started paying attention to. The red hunting hat that he bought in New York City for how much? $1. That's right. I know you got that. So he's got this hat that he wears, and I'll put a picture of the hat up too. It's got this brim, and if he turns it around backwards, start noticing how he's feeling. It's usually a little more bold and confident. And then if he's trying to protect himself, or he's feeling insecure or not as comfortable, more vulnerable, I guess is the best word, he turns it forward and kind of covers his face more. So I love that Salinger uses this hat as a symbol for Holden's emotional state of being. So with that, keep paying attention to the hat. The ducks got mentioned, the ducks on the pond that he was thinking of when he was at Spencer's house. They'll come up multiple times too. They become a symbol in the book, and we're introduced to another symbol in this chapter. I won't spoil it, but in telling you any details about it, there's a baseball glove that belongs to a character named Allie, who's Holden's brother. So Holden's going to tell us about that baseball glove in chapter 5, and we'll talk about symbol once we're done with the reading of the chapter. If you want a little bit more about symbolism, here's a quick video, and then we'll get back and we'll talk about descriptive writing once the chapter is over, and what you can look forward to for your own writing fun that you can post to Schoology in the very near future. So with that said, we're going to go into chapter 5. So please take a minute to find your text. I'm going to go in here and find my text. And I believe chapter 5 starts on page 19. And again, you can pop the numbers in the PDF on top and just press enter. Was I right? Yes, bottom of 19. Sorry for the pause, dramatic pause. So yeah, chapter 5 starts on the bottom of 19, and you can, again, it does become useful to just pop the numbers in here and find your way to the page. So here we go. We're still same night, Saturday night at Pensy, and Holden's just left, Stradlater just left to go on that date with Jane. Holden's just with Allie trying to figure out what it is he's going to do that evening. So here we go, chapter 5. We always had the same meal on Saturday nights at Pensy. It was supposed to be a big deal because they gave you steak. I'll bet $1,000 the reason they did that was because a lot of guys' parents came up to school on Sunday. Old Thermer probably figured everybody's mother would ask their darling boy what he had for dinner last night, and he'd say steak. What a racket. You should have seen the steaks. There were these little hard, dry jobs that you could hardly even cut. You always got these very lumpy mashed potatoes on steak night. And for dessert, you got a brown Betty, which nobody ate, except maybe the little kids in the lower school that didn't know any better, and guys like Ackley that ate everything. It was nice, though. When we got out of the dining room, there were about 3 inches of snow on the ground, and it was still coming down like a madman. It looked pretty as hell, and we all started throwing snowballs and horsing around all over the place. It was very childish, but everybody was really enjoying themselves. I didn't have a date or anything, so I and this friend of mine, Maul Broussard, that was on the wrestling team, decided we'd take a bus into Akerstown and have a hamburger and maybe see a lousy movie. Neither of us felt like sitting around on our ass all night. I asked Mal if he minded if Ackley came along with us. The reason I asked was because Ackley never did anything on Saturday night, except stay in his room and squeeze his pimples or something. Mal said he didn't mind, but that he wasn't too crazy about the idea. He didn't like Ackley much. Anyway, we both went to our rooms to get ready and all, and while I was putting on my galoshes and crap, I yelled over to asked old Ackley if he wanted to go to the movies. He could hear me all right through the shower curtains, but he didn't answer me right away. He was the kind of guy that hates to answer you right away. Finally, he came over through the goddamn curtains and stood on the shower ledge and asked who was going besides me. He always had to know who was going. I swear, if that guy was shipwrecked somewhere and you rescued him in a goddamn boat, he'd want to know who the guy was that was rowing it before he'd even get in. I told him Mel Broussard was going. He said, that bastard? All right, wait a second. You'd think he was doing you a big favor. It took him about 5 hours to get ready. While he was doing it, I went over to my window and opened it and packed a snowball with my bare hands. The snow was very good for packing. I didn't throw it at anything, though. I started to throw it at a car that was parked across the street, but I changed my mind. The car looked so nice and white, then I started to throw it at a hydrant, but that looked too nice and white, too. Finally, I didn't throw it at anything. All I did was close the window and walk around the room with a snowball, packing it harder. A little while later, I still had it with me when I and Broussard and Ackley got on the bus. The bus driver opened the door and made me throw it out. I told him I wasn't going to chuck it at anybody, but he wouldn't believe me. People never believe you. Broussard and Ackley both had seen the picture that was playing. So all we did, we just had a couple of hamburgers and played the pinball machine for a little while, then took the bus back to Pensy. I didn't care about not seeing the movie anyway. It was supposed to be a comedy with Cary Grant in it and all that crap. Besides, I'd been to the movies with Broussard and Ackley before. They both laughed like hyenas at stuff that wasn't even funny. I didn't even enjoy sitting next to them in the movies. It was only about 8:45 when we got back to the dorm. Old Broussard was a bridge fiend, and he started looking around the dorm for a game. Old Ackley parked himself in my room just for a change. Only instead of sitting on the arm of Stradlater's chair, he lay down on my bed, with his face right on my pillow and all. He started talking in this very monotonous voice and picking at his pimples. I dropped about 1,000 hints, but I couldn't get rid of them. All he did was keep talking in this very monotonous voice about some babe he was supposed to have had sexual intercourse with the summer before. He had already told me about it about 100 times. Every time he told it, it was different. One minute he'd give it to her in his cousin's Buick. The next minute he'd be giving it to her under some boardwalk. It was a lot of crap. Naturally, he was a virgin if I ever saw one. I doubt if he ever even gave anybody a feel. Anyway, finally I had to come right out and tell him that I had to write a composition for Stradlater and that he had to clear the hell out so I could concentrate. He finally did, but he took his time about it as usual. After he left, I put on my pajamas and bathrobe and my old hunting hat and started writing the composition. The thing was, I couldn't think of a room or a house or anything to describe the way Stradlater said he had to have. I'm not too crazy about describing rooms and houses anyway. So what I did, I wrote about my brother Allie's baseball mitt. It was a very descriptive subject. It really was. My brother Allie had this left-handed fielder's mitt. He was left-handed. The thing that was descriptive about it, though, was that he had poems written all over the fingers and the pockets and everywhere in green ink. He wrote them on it so that he'd have something to read when he was in the field and nobody was up at bat. He's dead now. He got leukemia and died when we were up in Maine on July 18th, 1946. You'd have liked him. He was 2 years younger than I was, but he was about 50 times as intelligent. He was terrifically intelligent. His teachers were always writing letters to my mother, telling her what a pleasure it was having a boy like Allie in their class. And they weren't just shooting the crap, they really meant it. But it wasn't just that, he was the most intelligent member in the family. He was also the nicest in a lot of ways. He never got mad at anybody. People with red hair are supposed to get mad very easily, but Allie never did, and he had very red hair. I'll tell you what kind of red hair he had. I started playing golf when I was only 10 years old. I remember once, the summer I was around 12, teeing off and all, and having a hunch that if I turned around, all of a sudden, I'd see Allie. So I did, and sure enough, he was sitting on his bike outside the fence. There was this fence that went all around the course, and he was sitting there about 150 yards behind me, watching me tee off. That's the kind of red hair he had. God, he was a nice kid, though. He used to laugh so hard at something he thought of at the dinner table, and he just about fell off his chair. I was only 13, and they were going to have me psychoanalyzed and all because I broke all the windows in the garage. I don't blame them. I really don't. I slept in the garage the night he died, and I broke all the goddamn windows with my fists just for the hell of it. I even tried to break all the windows on the station wagon we had that summer, but my hand was already broken and everything by that time, and I couldn't do it. It was a very stupid thing to do, I'll admit, but I hardly didn't even know what I was doing. I was doing it, and you didn't know Allie. My hand still hurts me once in a while when it rains and all, and I can't make a real fist anymore, not a tight one, I mean, but outside of that, I don't care much. I mean, I'm not going to be a goddamn surgeon or a violinist anyway. Anyway, that's what I wrote for Stradlater's composition, or that's what I wrote Stradlater's composition about. Old Allie's baseball mitt. I happen to have it with me in my suitcase, so I got it out and copied down the poems that were written on it. All I had to do was change Allie's name so that nobody would know it was my brother and not Stradlater. I wasn't too crazy about doing it, but I couldn't think of anything else descriptive. Besides, I sort of liked writing about it. It took me about an hour because I had to use Stradlater's lousy typewriter. It kept jamming on me. The reason I didn't use my own was because I lent it to a guy down the hall. It was around 10:30, I guess, when I finished it. I wasn't tired, though, so I looked out the window for a while. It wasn't snowing out anymore, but every once in a while, you could hear a car somewhere not being able to get started. You could also hear old Ackley snoring, right through the goddamn shower curtains. You could hear him. He had sinus troubles, and he couldn't breathe too hot when he was asleep. That guy had just about everything. Sinus troubles, pimples, lousy teeth, halitosis, crummy fingernails. You had to feel a little sorry for that crazy son of a bitch. End of chapter 6. So I'm just going to go back to this beautiful paragraph. It's almost the whole page, page 21. Allie's baseball mitt. So I would mark this up, right? If you can mark it up in the PDF, or maybe you have your hard copy. This is hugely symbolic. Allie's baseball mitt, right? This is beautiful Salinger writing too. This is where I just pause every time. Stream of consciousness, we're in Holden's head, right? And he's describing his brother, right? So we find out about his younger brother named Allie through the use of this symbol of Allie's baseball mitt. And as he's describing the baseball mitt, we find out what the baseball mitt looks like. We find out it has writing in green ink all over it. He wrote poems to entertain himself when he was in the field. And then, like gut punch, he's dead now, right? He got leukemia and died when we were up in Maine on July 18th, 1946. You'd have liked him. That's that breaking the fourth wall. Suddenly we're talking to the audience, right? And then he goes back into his description of Allie, that he's 2 years younger, he's terrifically intelligent. I love the anecdote, these are called anecdotes, where he gives a little story about Allie, seeing Allie at the golf course and his red hair all the way, across the hole. So he's like, looks over at the fence, he says, he's teeing off, and there he is, right on his bike. And so he puts in this little anecdote that tells us about Allie and his red hair. And then he does another little anecdote, a little story about him at the dinner table, just laughing. And then we find out how old Holden was when his brother died and how upset it made him. And that his parents were going to send him for help to be psychoanalyzed, but they didn't, because his reaction was that he was so angry, right? And he didn't know what to do, and he had no one to help him. So he broke all the windows and he slept in the garage, and then that's it. He says, you know, that his hand still hurts him, but he doesn't really care that much. Hugely traumatizing event for Holden, right? This is going to be something that keeps coming up in the story. This is unresolved feelings for Holden. So he's never really gotten the help that he needed to cope with the fact that he lost his brother, very sad, when he was just 13. So this whole paragraph, right, it's a page, is a beautiful example of descriptive writing. So and symbolism. So if you go back to our notes, there's a little link that'll bring you to what is descriptive writing. And I would look through it. It talks about what characteristics of descriptive writing are. And we have our example there of Holden's, brother's Allie and his baseball mitt. And this just talks about when you approach your own descriptive writing, things that you can do. So one is to think about imagery. We've already talked about imagery when we were thinking about Mr. Spencer's house and the descriptions using the 5 senses, right? So you can think about approaching your descriptive writing by considering your 5 senses when you think of an object, person, place, thing to use, and then, look at some of these other descriptions of what you could do when you want to write something descriptive. So Salinger also uses a lot of details. He gives us a symbol, right, that helps represent this person, Allie. He uses multiple anecdotes, which are little stories that help us understand this character, Allie, and Holden and his family a little bit better. And he uses a lot of that imagery. So the way things look, the way things feel, maybe even the way things sound. So all of those things combined and some other techniques, figurative language techniques, help us get this great image of Allie. And again, so this is both descriptive writing, imagery, and symbolism with that baseball glove. So that baseball glove is a symbol of Allie. So with that, I'm going to stop the share. And that passage always gets to me a little bit. I love that passage. It's one of my favorite passages. And we will come back to it because Holden does talk about Allie, his brother, a few times throughout the course of the book. It's some unresolved trauma for Holden, who, when he's telling us the story, is 17, but in that weekend that we're looking at, so it's a Saturday night, right? So he's telling us as a flashback, over the course of a long weekend, he was 16 years old. So this would have been 3 years after his brother had died. So he's still things that he's dealing with because that was a traumatic experience for himself and his family. So with that said, that was chapter 5, and we'll have a chapter 6 lesson to come, but look at Schoology because you are going to have a descriptive writing, a creative writing assignment where you get to play around with your own descriptive paragraph. So look out for that on Schoology, and I will see you next time. So be well out there. All right, take care. Bye-bye.